Welcome to the first mini lesson. Now you'll notice I haven't categorized this into either of bio or chemistry, and that's mostly because it's an overlapping concept. It shows up in both fields, and that's why we need to go over them very briefly in its own unit. The essence of a functional group is that it's an existing molecule or just collection of atoms that are bonded to each other and that when tacked on to the end of an existing molecule, they can create or add brand new properties to that same molecule. It'll be easiest to go about this just by talking about it first. So let's start off with a hydroxyl group. Hydroxyl groups are written as OH. It's just an oxygen, which is electronegative, bonded to a hydrogen, delta positive. The reason I'm emphasizing this specifically is that it's polar, and that's the main function of this group. When you tack on a hydroxyl group to any molecule, that molecule becomes called an alcohol. And usually the name of the actual molecule itself will end with the suffix OL. For example, this is ethanol. What separates ethanol from ethane is this OL, which is from this group. The function of this functional group is to make the molecule water soluble. Because without a polar group, like dissolves like. And if this is nonpolar, it won't dissolve in water. The reason this would be nonpolar is because the carbon-hydrogen bond is usually considered nonpolar, at our level at least. The next group is pretty interesting. It's a bit more unique than the other ones, in that it can form two different types of molecules depending on its position on that molecule. If it's located somewhere in the middle of our chain, we call it an aldehyde. Whereas if it's located at the end, we call it a ketone. It's not very important for us to talk about the function of carbonyl right now, but it will prove to be something you can keep an eye out for later. The next group is the carboxyl group. It's written as COOH, which would make one think that it's COOH, right? And there should be no problems with this. But not really. Remember that carbon has a need to form 4 bonds, which means that we're missing 2 here. That's because this isn't how the structure of carbonyl looks. Instead, it's like this. We have a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, then single bonded to a hydroxyl group. Notice anything yet? Well, this is a carbonyl group, and this is a hydroxyl group. So if we combine those words, we get carboxyl. The name of any compound that has this is carboxylic acid, or even more simply and generally, organic acid. You'll remember from our lesson on carbon that organic acids, and specifically the term organic, refer to any compounds containing carbon. Now we're going to talk about an amino group. Amino groups are written as NH2, and they compose of a nitrogen bonded to 2 hydrogens like so. The function of an amino group is also going to be discussed more so later, but it acts as a base, NH2+, and therefore can pick up hydrogen ions from the surrounding water and form a bond with them to make the compound more acidic. So if it has an amino group, it's likely to be basic. That being said, it's also important to note that whenever a molecule has an NH2 group attached to it, it's called an amine. Next, we're going to talk about a sulfahedryl group. It's more commonly referred to by the name of the substance that it forms, which is called a thiol. This group is just sulfur, and hydrogen. This is the entire group. Gets added onto the end to create this compound. And in this specific case, we're looking at another amino acid. Amino acids are a type of molecule that we will discuss in our next bio lesson, so keep an ear out for that next time. Basically, their function is to react with each other. So a sulfahedral group would react with another one to stabilize a protein. That's all it is. Only a few more left. Now we're going to talk about a phosphate group. It's commonly written like this. And if you're wondering, why don't we just create this molecule, which is the phosphate molecule, by combining the oxygens? It's supposed to reference the structural formula, which means how the molecule or the group actually looks. It looks like this. So reading from left to right, you have the oxygen, and then you have PO3. And it has a 2 negative charge because this oxygen is negatively charged, although not in this case because I bound it to another molecule, and this oxygen is negatively charged. Adenosine might be familiar to some of you, as might be the term ATP, and this is a good time to stop and talk about it. ATP is the universal energy molecule, especially for our cells. Cells energy. The reason is the bonds between each phosphate group in ATP are very strong. To demonstrate, I'm going to draw out these bonds. And note that there will be one more phosphate over here. This is super important because it's the strongest energy carrying molecule, which means that if this bond is broken, a ton of energy gets released. The full name of ATP is adenosine, for the molecule that the phosphate groups are bound to. Adenosine. Triphosphate. Tri meaning 3, and phosphate for the phosphate groups attached. But when this bond is broken, we then form ADP, which stands for adenosine diphosphate. Di is the term for 2, while tri is the term for 3. So, phosphate groups are super important for storing energy within their bonds. The last thing to note is that adding a phosphate group to a molecule results in it being called an organic phosphate. So ATP is a very common example of an organic phosphate. And the last group we're going to talk about now is the methyl group, which is abbreviated CH3. Effectively, it can be tacked onto any molecule. Now, the example given in Campbell's is very complicated, but it's basically just a ring structure, a 6-carbon ring, like so, with additional molecules branching off of it. But what we're looking for here is our methyl group, CH3. And this is probably the only example that would make any amount of sense, because all we want to see right now is just what this looks like. The function of it is a little too complicated to talk about right now because it involves going into a lot of stuff we haven't talked about yet. So we're just going to leave that to hang as it is.